Rain chews the edges of the two-lane road as a battered hatchback crawls up into the Blue Ridge. The mountain air is cold enough to turn every breath to fog. In the driver's seat, a woman rubs her belly and talks to it like the person inside already knows her better than anyone left in the world. "It's just for a while," she says. "A month, maybe 2. We'll figure it out, Bean, I promise." Her name is Sarah Whitaker. She is 31, 7 months pregnant, and the kind of tired that goes past sleep. A folded eviction notice from Charlotte is jammed into the glove compartment, as if hiding it there could unring the bell. Her ex-fiancé stopped answering the phone the day the credit cards froze. Her last paycheck hit the account 9 weeks ago, and the severance went to the hospital bill from a scare at 12 weeks. This little mountain cabin, left to her by a great aunt she barely remembers, is the last place that's hers to unlock. There is enough change rattling in a mason jar next to her for coffee, and enough hope in her gut to pretend that the road ahead isn't all switchbacks. The GPS gives up at a hairpin turn, chirps, and falls silent. Her wipers beat a panicked rhythm. She swallows and keeps going until the gravel crunches under her tires at a clearing that looks like it forgot the rest of the world. The cabin is smaller than she imagined, and older than any picture. A seam of light showing at the edge of the front door where wood has shrunk away from its hinges. A split rail fence leans drunkenly across the yard, and just off the back corner, where the tree line huddles like a group of people moving closer in the rain, is a shape that shouldn't be there. At first, she thinks it's a rock pile, the kind of cairn hikers add to out of nervousness. But there's a linear order to it. Flat stones laid just so, a shallow oblong mound. A rusted iron cross pressed into the earth at the head. Her shoes sink into wet leaves as she steps toward it, one hand braced at the small of her back, the other on her belly. The iron cross has 2 letters hand-stamped into it, just crooked enough to feel human. E.W. Beneath that, a date that makes the rain feel colder on her scalp. 1932. It's a secret grave. Right beside her little cabin, tucked as if the cabin itself was meant to keep guard. She stands there until the rain finds a way through her coat and down her neck, and she knows she's crying when salt hits the corner of her mouth. She doesn't believe in omens, not really, but there is something in seeing a grave when you show up somewhere to start over that makes you think the universe is trying to tell you how slim the margin is. A line of water runs from the eaves. The sky grumbles. She goes to the door. The lock is stubborn, but the key from the envelope the lawyer sent her, from the estate of June Whitlow, deceased, turns. The door drifts open with a sigh like it's been holding its breath for a decade. Dust breathes out to meet her. The room is one big space divided by a short wall, a potbelly stove to the left, a sagging yellow couch to the right, a scarred pine table under a window that looks out at the grave. Someone left a rocking chair with a broken runner turned upside down against the far wall, like it tried to flee and got tangled in itself. A storm shakes the mountain's shoulders. The first clap of thunder rolls through the little place and rattles a framed picture on the mantel. A younger woman with a jaw like Sarah's, and a smile softer than anything the world bothers to make now. Aunt June, the back says in an elegant hand. Sarah wipes the glass with her sleeve and presses her lips together to keep from whispering to a picture. The floor creaks in 2 distinct notes when she steps toward the kitchen half, one of them hollow, like it remembers bodies walking here and still wants to sing about it. Hey. Before we go deeper, if stories like this keep you company on tough nights, tap like and hit subscribe. It truly helps us grow, and you'll get new, wild, heart-twisting stories every day. Drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far this little porch light reaches. Okay, back to Sarah. She leaves the lights off because the place looks kinder in the dark. The refrigerator has nothing but the ghost smell of milk. The stove is older than she is, but gas still coughs when she turns the knob. She drops her bag in the corner and stretches on tiptoes until the taut ache across her abdomen eases. Her phone pings. A new email from Caldwell Land and Timber, LLC. Dear Ms. Whitaker, we are writing to inform you that the parcel located at 235 Old Quarry Road has been placed under notice of constructive possession by Caldwell Land and Timber as successor by merger to Whitlow Lumber Holdings. Records indicate default of county taxes in 2016 and 2017. We are prepared to offer a cash settlement if you will execute a quit-claim deed relinquishing any interest. Please contact our office within 21 days to avoid escalation to formal foreclosure and removal. The room tilts and rights itself. There is a number in her head that has chased her across state lines. 30 days, 21, 14. Everything feels like a countdown. She kneels, careful, to plug in a lamp. The bulb flickers, then fills the room with the color of weak tea. The rain leans on the roof like a tired person. She breathes in dust and old wood and something else. Something sweet and turned, apple peel left to dry, maybe. She circles the room, making a map of small things. A nail where a clock used to hang. A line of marks on the door frame. Inches and dates. The last one a shy 5-4, with 1973 scrawled next to it. In the kitchen, an old calendar pinned to the wall on April, no year, just Easter, written in pencil, and a list for flour, sugar, kerosene. There is a door in the floor. It's not obvious until she steps close and thinks about the hollow note the floor made. The seam is cut clean, with a ring set into it, brown with rust. A loop of chain holds it shut, padlocked. She sits back on her heels and stares. The ring is cold when she touches it. The lock is small and cheap, the kind teenagers use on lockers. Aunt June never mentioned a cellar. Her body answers the ache of the day with a sharp knock at the base of her spine that makes her suck air. She sits on the edge of the broken rocker and rubs circles into her belly until the knock becomes a hum. We're okay, she tells the room, or herself, or the person inside the person she used to be. We're okay. On the mantel, almost hidden by a swath of lace, is a little locket on a chain. The heart is dented, the gold worn pale, the hinge stiff. Inside, the smallest portrait she's ever seen looks back at her. A woman with calm eyes and dark hair pulled back tight. She looks like the kind of person who could keep 3 generations alive on sugar and hope. On the opposite side of the locket, jammed into a spot where nothing should fit, is a tiny, old-fashioned key. She looks at the locket, then the lock in the floor. She feels absurd. And then a thought floats up, light as dust. What would you do if your only hope was hidden in a place everyone else had forgotten? Her fingers shake, and the key almost slips through her skin as she works it into the lock. The teeth are too fine for modern tumblers. The lock doesn't want to understand. She almost gives up, but her hand has a slow stubbornness in it now that she recognizes as her grandmother's. She turns. The lock clicks open with a sound like a sigh, like something that has been waiting so long it forgot how to be relieved. The door is heavy but not impossible. The smell that rises is earth and apple, and the faint tang of old coal. The light from the lamp falls down into a square of dirt floor and a short run of stairs, the kind built by someone who didn't plan to use them much. She stands at the edge, listening. Somewhere under the cabin, a mouse argues with a spider in the language of small rustles. The baby rolls, knocking her from the inside, a code of foot taps. She puts her palm on the top of her belly, half amused. You too, huh? The first step creaks like somebody making an old joke for an old friend. She goes down, one hand trailing along the rough wall to keep her from falling. At the bottom, there's not much. Old bins built into the dirt. A shelf with the ghost rings of jars that went missing decades ago. A potato that gave up and turned to sawdust. A line of string once held onions. Now it holds empty air. At the far wall, between two studs, is a darker rectangle. A section of plank that doesn't match the rest. She touches it, and it gives just a hair. Behind it, the smell of oil and paper. "You're kidding," she whispers. "You're actually kidding me." The plank is wedged, not nailed. She pulls until her fingertips throb, and it gives with a wooden pop. Behind it is a space the size of a bread box, and inside that, what looks like a box itself, oilcloth wrapped and tied up with twine that crackles with age. The twine gives way with a soft sound. She unwraps it on her knees on the dirt floor, dust making halos in the lamplight. A leather notebook, dark with handling, bound with a strap that runs through a brass loop. A little bundle of letters tied with ribbon, the topmost envelope addressed in the kind of script that makes your chest hurt. "To my June, when the time is right." A square of old heavy paper with the county clerk's seal pressed in one corner, folded and refolded until the edges flake. A canvas pouch that clinks when she picks it up. The weight of small, important things. She holds the notebook like she thinks it might be soft. The first page has a name written in the careful hand of someone who was taught letters like they were prayers. Eleanor Whitlow. Below that, a date, February 9th, 1932. Then, in smaller writing, in a wobbly line that says, "The writer's hand was not strong that day. There is something I want the baby to have, even if I don't get to tell her myself." She sits back on her heels and closes her eyes. In that dark, in that little under-cabin space with the rain pressing steady above and the baby pressing steady below, she feels like she has set her hand into a set of fingerprints worn deep before her. She reads, and the words dig small, careful hooks into her chest. Eleanor writes about the mill that used to sit at the curve of the creek, the way the water froths white and hungry when the rains come. She writes about a man who wears a hat to hide his eyes and how he can make a room quiet just by stepping into it. She writes about a whole family's legs wearing a path to this door. She writes about land and what it means in a winter when the corn has failed, and the men who own paper make decisions that move people like beans on a counter. Silas Caldwell is named for the first time on the third page. The letters lean a little to the right when she writes his name, a tilt that could be anger or fear. He wants our Ridge, the way my daddy wanted a son. He thinks he is owed both. She writes about a deed, about money that went sideways and a signature put where it did not belong. She writes about not being afraid. She writes about the baby moving. She writes about blood on the floor. She writes about how to hide a thing so that it can be found. Put it in the place no one will want to touch, she writes. The one quiet place a man like Mr. Caldwell never looks because he doesn't think he'll ever end up there. Make a grave with no bones in it. Make it just deep enough to make him uncomfortable. Put the deed in a box there. Put a few coins, too, like you're buying yourself time from God. Then tell June, but only when she is carrying her own child. A woman holding two hearts is brave enough to dig a hole and pull a secret out. Sarah looks up. The top of her head hits the edge of the hatch with a dull thunk, and she swallows a little curse. The rain has turned from steady to sheets. The roof rattles. The secret grave sits 20 feet behind the place where she sleeps, and this woman, whose name is pressed on the iron cross there, left her a map in case the world ever agrees again to be kind. She slides the letters back into the oilcloth and carries them up the stairs cradled like they're the thing in her arms that needs the most protection. On the table, she lays the notebook flat. On the 4th page, 2 lines have been scratched out hard enough to tear the paper. Under the scratch, in a different smaller hand, a word appears, hush. She unknots the ribbon around the letters. The first envelope has a smear across the back from damp fingers and a piece of string tucked under the flap like a promise. The letter inside is short. Junebird. If you are reading this, it means I did not get to tell you the story proper. It also means the man who keeps his money in other men's pockets did not find what he wants most. If I can't outlive him, I can outhide him. The iron cross by the cellar door is where it is, but when I say grave, I mean a box with dirt over top. If the iron cross is gone, look for the dogwood behind it with the low limb that hooks right. Count 3 paces east from the trunk. Your daddy would say, "Don't put this in writing," but your daddy isn't here now, is he? When you're holding a baby of your own, you'll find strength I was still looking for. Never forget, we're Whitlows before we're anybody else. Eleanor. She reads it 3 times, each time slower. The baby kicks insistently against her palm. She looks at the window and the iron cross beyond it. The rain leans in, listening. She pulls on her boots. The mud is cold and sucks at the soles, but the ground is soft, and the shovel she finds wedged by the back step still has enough edge to bite. The iron cross is lean and mean, the letters eaten almost away. She starts to dig at the foot where the stones lay tidy. The first clods come easy. The hole fills with water, and her breath fogs in the falling dark, but she keeps at it, shoulder and hip and everything she has lined up behind this one motion. 8 inches in, the shovel thunks against something that isn't rock. "Come on," she says. It's half prayer, half order. Mud runs into the hole. She crouches, her belly pushing hard against her thighs, and scoops water with her hands. Her nails scrape metal. She clears away enough to see the corner of a box. The lid is rusted, but there's a lock. She presses the locket's key into it without letting herself think that this is exactly the kind of thing that would only ever work in a story. It binds, then turns. Inside is oil and paper, and the smell of old apples again, and the tiniest sound, like a sigh that cheated time. She lifts out a metal tin wrapped in oilcloth and tied with the same kind of ribbon that bound the letters. She holds it against her chest like she needs both hands to feel it. The rain slackens. Somewhere down mountain, a car passes, then is gone. On her kitchen table, under a lamp that flickers like it's trying to decide whether this is a good idea, she opens the tin. Inside is another bundle of letters, older than the ones in the cellar. There is a parchment, brittle as a moth's wing, with seals and signatures and an embossed stamp that makes her throat tighten because even 70 years later, the county seal looks like it always has and may always will. Original Land Deed, 1898. Someone has written on a ribbon in faded ink. There is a folded sheet with the heading, Affidavit of A. Pike, that makes her heart knock hard enough that she has to sit down again. The last thing is a little cloth bag. It's tied so tight she almost has to cut it, but it gives. She pours a handful of dimes into her palm, all silver, all old enough to have been on some other table while a war ended. There are maybe 60 of them, maybe more. There's a starred note in the tin, sell only enough to eat. Some fool will buy the lot and cheat you. Her phone vibrates itself across the table and into the cradle of an old placemat. Unknown number. She almost lets it go to voicemail, but everything is pressure now, and pressure makes people make bad decisions. The baby flutters. She answers. "Miss Whitaker?" a man's voice asks. Polite, smooth, cheerful the way Southern men in suits learn how to be. This is Beau Caldwell with Caldwell Land and Timber. Welcome to the mountain. "Hi," she says too fast. She wipes mud off her wrist with her sleeve and leaves a streak. I hate to bother you on your first night, he says, not lying very well. But we wanted to extend an olive branch. That cabin's got a special place in my family's story. I imagine this whole paperwork thing has been a mess for you. It's been something. Let me be the good guy here, he says. We'll write you a check, generous, I promise you. More than that place would fetch on the open market. You can be back in Charlotte before you have to worry about carving a path through snow with a stroller. Give my assistant 10 minutes to draw up a figure. Then you run down to the Blue River Bank in the morning, and we've got this all buttoned up. Or you wait, and this turns into one of those things that eats time. And frankly, time feels like something you don't have a lot of, from the sound of it. She looks down at the letters, at the seal on the deed, at Eleanor's words written in a hand that got steadier when she talked about making a liar of a bully. What are you really offering? She says. A pause. She can hear him smile because it sounds like he turned his head away to do it. 50, he says. 50,000, clean, for something you didn't even know you had 2 weeks ago. She pictures the $38 in her checking account and the grocery list she wrote with her hand on her belly like she could draw food out of the air. And if I say no? Then I'd hate to see a sheriff come out there on a cold morning when you're heavy and ask you to pack a bag, he says softly. And she thinks about the man with the hat and the eyes that hide and how these families eat their morals for breakfast and ask for seconds. I don't want that any more than you do, family to family. Your aunt was a dear friend of my mama's. I'll think about it, she says, which means no, but puts the word in a quote. No long thinking, he says, still kind, clock's ticking. He hangs up and leaves the shape of his voice in her ear like a stain. Rain beats at the window, and the grave beyond it looks smaller in this light, less frightening. She puts her hand on the notebook, and the baby rolls under her palm as if to say, move. The next morning, the storm shakes itself out like a dog. The world is clean and cold. She dresses in the one sweater that still pulls down over her belly and eats toast with peanut butter and a banana and drinks tap water like it's champagne. She tucks the notebook and the deed into her bag and locks the door out of habit, even though there's not much here that anybody would want. The road looks different in daylight. The mountains are less like looming men and more like old ladies hunched over their knitting. The Blue River Bank sits on a corner in town that has the same barber pole it had in a photo from 1901. A sign in the coffee shop window says, Biscuit Wednesday. Men in ball caps stand around with coffee, pretending not to look at who goes where. The door to the bank is heavy. The carpet is industrial blue. A woman behind the counter smiles with her mouth and not her eyes. I need to talk to someone about an old deed, she says. You need the clerk's office for property, the woman says, perky, sliding a pen into a cup labeled pens in black marker. There's an account too, Sarah says, bluffing, because Eleanor needs her to be brave. From Pine Hollow Savings and Trust? The perk drops and gets replaced with interest, which is the closest a bank will get to honest emotion. That was merged into Blue River sometime in the Carter administration, the woman says. What name on the account? Whitlow, she says, because there's no point in pretending to be anything else here. What initial? E, she says then. J. June, or maybe Eleanor. The woman looks at her a long moment like she is trying to remember which side of an old story she's supposed to land on. Sit, she says, pointing to a chair. I'll get Mr. Collins. Mr. Collins is a man who looks like he irons his jeans. He takes her into a little room with a table and no windows. She puts the locket on the table and then the deed very carefully, and she watches his face do what faces do even when their mouths know better. Where did you get this? He says. In a box under a cross that says EW, she says, so plainly her own voice surprises her. There are letters, too. I'll need to make copies, he says, and we'll need to verify signatures, but Pine Hollow savings and trust accounts have very particular protocols. Miss Whitaker, do you by any chance have a key? Old-fashioned, there's a lot of folklore. These old mountain banks did things differently. She loosens the chain around her neck and slides the little key free. It sits on the table like a tooth lost late in life. If he was smiling before, he's not now. He leaves her in a fluorescent hum. She can feel the building's weird tension settle into her muscles. When he comes back, he looks like a man who found something heavy and is now trying to put his hand under the right place to lift it. This is irregular, he says, and she almost laughs because that word is a way of calling something an earthquake without getting dust on your shoes. But I think we can say with reasonable confidence that there is an existing account linked to Miss Eleanor Whitlow that was not escheated to the state because of conditions she set. It names a beneficiary. June. It names a contingency. The contingency has ripened. Ripened? She repeats, because sometimes the only thing you can do is say a word back to a person who chose it. It allows disbursement to June's lawful heir when that heir is expecting a child, he says, not meeting her eyes, and she wonders how many little rules people made around here to keep things from men like Silas Caldwell and Beau's smooth little voice. Subject to identification. He looks at her locket and the deed and his own reflection in the window of the empty little room and then nods to himself. We can start with an initial disbursement, he says, if that helps. It helps. She walks out with enough to buy groceries, pay for gas, and stop the constant rattle in her chest that has been there since the last ultrasound continued to show a heartbeat. She stops at Grady's General Store and buys milk and eggs and a bag of oranges just because she can. In the parking lot, she leans against the car and cries into her sleeves. When she looks up, a woman stands near enough to be kind and far enough away to be polite. "You a Whitlow girl?" the woman asks. Her hair is white and piled up high. Her eyes are blue and bright as a thing made out of ice. "Great Aunt June," Sarah says, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm Sarah. Hattie Green," the woman says. "If you're smart, you'll be hungry. Come on. I make cornbread that will fix whatever the world broke last." Hattie's kitchen smells like butter and onions. She puts a plate in front of Sarah like she's done it 1,000 times for 100 girls who washed up into town on one kind of wave or another. Between bites, the story of the town spills into the air. Who's kin to who? Who ran off to Nashville and came back when the sound there got expensive? When Sarah says Caldwell, Hattie's mouth pinches. "They'll tell you they built this town," she says, like she's telling a child the truth about Santa gently. "But this town was here before they figured out how to count it." "Do you know an A. Pike?" Sarah asks, thinking of the affidavit. "He wrote something for Eleanor." "A. Pike." "Abram Pike," Hattie says, and her eyes go soft for a second in a way that makes Sarah suspect Hattie's been in love once at least, and long enough ago that she can look at it like a piece of glass the river wore smooth. Judge, practiced out of a room above the old drugstore, liked his whiskey and the truth in equal measure, which made him unpopular. He was a friend of your people. Died on the porch one night with his shoes off and his feet up. The story goes, he wrote down a lot of things he never told the court. "Did he write down this?" Sarah asks, feeling the weight of all the pages at home. "Maybe," Hattie says. "Maybe he wrote all of it and hid it in a box that takes a smart girl to find." On the way out, Hattie presses a business card into her hand. "Eli Turner," she says, "teaches history, volunteers at the Historical Society. He likes mountains and stories, and girls who have more fight than they think. He's honest. Mostly. Mostly sits with Sarah like a pebble in her shoe. She drives back to the cabin with the baby hiccuping inside her, and a bag of cornbread wrapped tight enough to keep it warm. In the late light, the Iron Cross's rust gleams like the last thread of red in a sunset. She sits at the table and reads Eleanor until night gathers itself and lays like a blanket over everything. The entries are spans apart, some days full of words and some weeks with none at all. The line between personal and legal blurs in a way that lets Sarah look straight at both without flinching. Eleanor writes about the wolf tree up behind the cabin, the giant oak with a crown like a cathedral, and a trunk that makes 3 men together look small. She writes, "The chimney knows." Count 9 and then 9 more. The words sound like nursery rhyme. Some pages are torn out and the edges look like teeth marks. Others are smudged so badly she can barely make out the letters. Somewhere in the middle of the notebook, Eleanor writes something that Sarah reads twice to make sure she didn't put it there with her own hand. Blood will come back around. You think the circle is broken forever, but it just takes the long way sometimes. I hope the girl who carries my girl is brave. The next morning, Sarah calls the number Hattie gave her. A man answers on the second ring. Eli Turner. "Hi," she says, suddenly aware of the way her voice gives her away. "I'm Sarah Whitaker. Hattie said you could help me make sense of something." "Mrs. Green told me to expect a Whitlow and a mystery," he says, in a voice that is warm and low and kind like an old coat. "2 of my favorite things. You okay?" "I'm working on it," she says, and it is the best answer she can give. They meet at the Historical Society, which is a room above the library with windows that look out over the courthouse and in on a row of old faces in frames. Eli is tall, the way trees are tall without being threatening. He has a handsome face that seems to have been made to laugh, but he doesn't abuse the privilege. His hands are nicked up and ink-stained, the way people who fix their own lives look. He takes the notebook and the deed with a tenderness that makes her think he has good people. "Eleanor Whitlow," he says, half to himself, like he's reading the name of someone who should have been his friend. "I've seen the Whitlow ledger in the archives, births and paids and bales sold, so I know the name, but not like this." He looks up. "You found this where?" "In a box under the ground," she says. She doesn't tell him about the Iron Cross, not yet. She doesn't know why, just that some things need to get used to the light slowly. He runs a finger along the seal. "Judge Pike," he mutters, and the way he says it makes her think he knows him too, in a way you can know someone you never met by reading the words they left like crumbs. He clears a place on the table and spreads papers out like maps. He flips the deed with a plastic ruler, so the oils from his fingers don't lift anything. He reads the affidavit for a long time with his head cocked. Then he exhales like a man who asked for a lot and got the thing he wanted, but it's heavy. "If this is what I think it is, it's dynamite," he says. Silas Caldwell basically makes a public confession here to the judge. He admits to coercion. He admits to paying off a clerk to file the deed in his favor. He says he burned the original. If this is the original and we can prove chain of custody, he looks at her with a kind of wonder that makes her want to step back and forward at the same time. You might have the gun and the bullet and the man who shot it all in one box. "I have a letter that says there's more," she says, thinking of the dogwood and the chimney. "Clues. What kind of clues?" "Nursery rhyme kind," she says. "Count 9. The chimney knows." His eyes crinkle at the corners. "I like riddles," he says, "and chimneys." They drive up to the cabin in his truck, because he insists her little car isn't up to the rutted path. The baby likes the bounce, kicking a steady drumline as the road rises. When they pull up, he stops in front of the grave and goes quiet. He lifts the iron cross up out of the mud with both hands, careful, like it could break. He runs a thumb over the letters and looks at her with a question that is more respect than ask. "I didn't know who she was," she says, almost apologizing to the ground. "Not until now." He nods, not mad at all. He goes to the chimney and stands with his head tipped back like he's asking it a question. "9, he says. He pulls a tape measure out of his back pocket and measures along the side of the fireplace, opening to a spot where the mortar looks a hair newer than the rest. "Look at that," he says, pleased in a way that makes the mountain change shape for Sarah for a second. He taps the brick, and it makes a sound that's just different enough to push their luck. "Got a screwdriver?" She brings him a butter knife and a spoon and a hair clip, because that's what she has. He laughs and uses the spoon to chip the mortar away. The brick comes loose with a sigh. Behind it is a hollow the size of a loaf pan and a little tin box, this one painted once and then rubbed down to metal with time. "I had a grandmother who hid cash in the freezer so my grandfather wouldn't buy 6 new pairs of overalls and call that a budget," Eli says, handing the tin to Sarah like it's the last egg left in the basket. "Let's see what your people were like." Inside is a folded sheet with a map drawn in a sure, strong hand, the kind of drawing people made before they had machines. It shows the cabin, the creek, stump marks where old trees used to be, the place where the mill sat, and a dotted circle around the grave with the iron cross. "Cemetery boundary," someone wrote, along with a note in the margin. "Protected by law, see Act of 1905. There's also a smaller key. There is also a button with an eagle stamped on it that looks like it might have been on a uniform, and a tiny glass vial with a curl of hair inside, tied up with thread. People are going to tell you this is melodrama," Eli says softly, almost as if he's overheard a ghost who didn't want to be rude. But it's not. This is how they kept things alive. "What about the 9 more?" she asks, her voice a little breathless under the rock of the baby's elbow. "Count 9 up," he says. They do, and the 9 above is a plank in the floor of the loft, notched to lift. Under it, a faded piece of linen with a line of numbers stitched into it. 3, 1, 9, 5, 2, 9, 1, 4. At the edge, P.O. Box 152. He looks at the linen, then at her. "Want to go to the post office?" he asks, grinning like he knows they are stepping into something, and he is the kind of person who likes a good step. Blue River's post office is a small building that still smells like wax and cardboard. The woman behind the counter wears a sweater with a snowflake on it even, though it is not close to snow season yet, and probably pretty comfortable to think it could be. "Box number?" she asks. She looks suspicious because that is part of the job. 152, Sarah says, feeling silly. "I know it's not. This is from a long time ago." The woman taps at an ancient computer like it has wronged her gently. "Well, I'll be," she says. "P.O. Box 152 is held in perpetuity. There's a note here, I've never seen one, but it has a red flag. I need 2 forms of ID and a key." They push the key under the glass like they are in a movie that can afford props. The box holds a packet the size of a book and the weight of a lie, if it were true. Inside is a folded legal document titled Codicil and Covenant, and stamped not just by Judge Pike, but by a county clerk who inked their name carefully. It is both a less polite and more beautiful document. It says that the Whitlow land is never to be conveyed to the Caldwell family or any successor in interest. It says, every descendant of Eleanor has the right of reversion if a Caldwell touches it. It sets a time frame for challenge and for quiet title and claims of adverse possession. The time frame ends on the last day of this month. There is a date stamped in red at the top, filed to be held in escrow. Release on presentation of key and locket by rightful heir with child. There is a signature on a line at the bottom that cracks Sarah's heart with a hunger she didn't know she had for a person long dead. Eleanor Whitlow, with the kind of steady-handedness of someone who practiced in the dark. Miss Whitaker, Eli says, quiet like church. This town runs on cousins and stories, and the way you can say both in one gesture. But this is going to break something open. She leaves with a stack of paper that makes the bag on her shoulder heavier than her body feels. She wants to run, but she walks step by step to Eli's truck. In the parking lot, a black SUV pulls in and noses close to Eli's bumper like a dog at a fence. The door opens, and a man steps out in a coat that cost more than Sarah's car. He smiles at her like a man who has learned to weaponize it. Miss Whitaker, he says, we keep running into each other. Mr. Caldwell, she says. Her body goes cold under her sweater. Didn't want to bother you at home again, he says. Thought we might talk on neutral ground. This isn't neutral for me, she says. He looks at Eli and then down at his shoes like he has to check which shoes he wore so he knows which face to put on. My legal team is filing a motion today, he says. Let me offer you 70. I'm not selling, she says. But she doesn't say it like stubborn. She says it like she has a piece of paper that makes her voice feel taller. He steps closer. Eli steps in without making it look like he did. Your mother knew my mother, Bo says, not giving up on the trick. She wouldn't want this to be ugly. You should speak to someone about whether ugly is a thing you get to define, Eli says, his voice nice but not soft. You're blocking the drive, Mr. Caldwell. Bo looks at Eli properly for the first time. You look familiar, he says, frowning. You a Turner? I am, Eli says. Turners are every damn where, Bo says, trying to make it a joke and failing. Just remember which side of the story paid for that park you like to picnic in. I remember who paid for that park, Eli says. It's on a brick in the ground, so I don't forget. Bo smiles, and it looks like he took the wrong class. He steps back and lets them pass. Clock's ticking, he says again, and she wants to say that sometimes the thing that makes a clock tick is the person looking at it, but she doesn't waste breath. On the drive back to the cabin, the road breaks into sun. The baby sleeps in a way she can feel, heavy and sweet under her hand. Eli keeps his eyes on the road and his hand steady on the wheel and gives quiet instructions about a lawyer he knows in town. Naomi Patel, he says. She hates bullies. She's smart. If she doesn't answer, we'll camp on her porch until she does. They call, she answers. Bring me everything, Naomi says. I'll make coffee. We'll make a plan. Naomi's office is in what used to be a gas station, and now is all bright wood and stacks of law books that look like they were read and not just carried. She listens without interrupting, which is a gift. She reads with a pen in her teeth, and sometimes she makes a sound that is a lawyer's version of a cuss. When she finishes, she looks up with eyes that are tired in the way that only women who carry 2 jobs, one for pay, one for the people they love, get. Okay, she says. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to file for a TRO, a temporary restraining order, to stop Caldwell from touching the property while we sort this out. We're going to file a complaint to quiet title on the basis of original deed and fraud. The cemetery boundary is going to be our friend because the law will protect it even if the judge doesn't like anything else about this. We'll need affidavits. We'll get Hattie and whoever else remembers the world as it was. We'll need DNA or a family Bible to draw the line from Eleanor to June to you. I have a ledger, Sarah says. Names and dates and hair. Naomi blinks. Hair? In a little bottle, Sarah says, feeling like she is telling someone about magic and asking them to believe in chemistry. Eleanor's, I think. Naomi sits back and lets her face relax in a way that looks like someone set down a bag of groceries that was heavier than it looked. "Okay," she says, softer. "This town is full of old boxes. Sometimes they turn out to have blessings in them." Naomi's motion lands on a judge's desk that afternoon. Caldwell's file their own motion an hour later like they were waiting with pens warmed up. The court sets a hearing for 3 days. 3 days. Sarah spends them walking between the cabin and the creek and the grave like a pilgrim. Eli spends them in the clerk's office, digging through plat books and ledgers and records no one looked at since the day they were written. Naomi spends them printing, highlighting, writing. Hattie spends them calling people who owe her favors from 1982 and reminding them that they are the kind of people who show up when it matters. At night, Sarah sits at the table with the lamp and listens to the stove's gentle tick and the baby's gentle swish, and reads Eleanor like prayers. On the second night, she finds a page torn so violently the paper has teeth. The piece left behind says, "If you are in a hurry, you will be sloppy. And if you are sloppy, a Caldwell will make a meal of it and call it Sunday." She is not sloppy. She stores the box under a loose plank in the floor, in a place where even a snake would think twice. On the third morning, she wakes to a truck she doesn't know crunching gravel outside. She pulls on a robe and steps onto the porch. The mountain air knifes her lungs and wakes her good. A man leans against the hood of the truck, arms crossed, the kind who can look like he belongs anywhere, wearing any kind of shirt. "You, Sarah Whitaker?" he asks, like she might be somebody else and ruin his day. "I am," she says. "You've been served," he says, holding out a manila envelope like it's either going to make him feel important or make him feel clean as soon as it's out of his hand. "Don't shoot the messenger." She laughs in spite of herself, a bright, sharp sound that makes the birds shift. "I don't own a gun," she says, taking it, even though the only thing she's ever wanted to shoot is the clock on the wall of the hospital where she waited 3 hours to be told she had a cold and not a catastrophe. It is the Caldwell motion, printed on heavy paper and dripping with words like adverse possession and legitimate purchaser for value. It is also a list of tricks that Naomi knows how to step around. She calls Naomi and Naomi swears with creativity and tells her to meet at the courthouse 30 minutes early. She calls Eli and he says, "I'm 10 minutes away." Even if he's 30, because that's what good people say when your voice makes a shape in your throat like tears. The courthouse is tall and stupid with its own history. People still wear hats in it like they do in church. Sarah stands next to Naomi in a room where the air conditioner sounds like a river and watches a judge with a name that makes her think of candy and Christmas settle into a chair like it's a throne. Bo is there with 2 lawyers and a new tie. He smiles at Sarah politely and then past her, like she is a reflection in a window and he can see the thing he wants behind her. Naomi stands, and her voice is a blade she uses to carve this particular day into a shape that fits Sarah. She says words like chain of title and intrinsic fraud and constructive notice. She holds up the deed like a picture of a baby. She holds up the affidavit like a letter from God. She gives the judge the codicil and lets him hold it for a long time like a stone he picked up in a creek on vacation. Then she says the word cemetery, and the judge's face changes because even people who believe money matters are more afraid of dead people than they are of rich ones. "There is a grave on this property," she says. "There are likely others. There is a cemetery boundary. Caldwells knew this and burned, then rebuilt an argument around their own ashes." The Caldwell lawyer gets up and calls it nonsense with nostalgia. And then it is Eli's turn, standing where witnesses stand to say, "I'm not a lawyer, sir, but I am a teacher, and I brought pictures." He shows photos of the grave, of the chimney brick, of the map in drawn hand. He swears on the Bible that the Iron Cross was there before the first Caldwell lumber mill ran its blade. He pronounces Whitley wrong once, and corrects himself because he gets nervous sometimes, and then embarrassed in a way that makes him blush high. The judge looks at Sarah like he is seeing the outline of her in a frame that has had different women in it before. "How far along?" he asks, not unkindly. 31 weeks, she says. "You got people?" he asks, which is his way of asking if he has to worry about her either way. "I'm getting them," she says, and it feels more true than anything else she's said to a stranger. "I'm issuing a temporary restraining order," he says. "Mr. Caldwell, you and yours are not to enter the property, alter it, or attempt in any way to disturb what might be a cemetery. Miss Whitaker, you're to secure the site, and if you knock down your chimney with a sledgehammer in the next week to find more old boxes, make sure someone writes it down." People laugh. The judge doesn't. "We'll hear the rest next Friday. If you have more, bring it. This looks a lot like a mess somebody tucked under a rug in 1932, hoping it would go away. Messes don't do that. They grow. My job is to sweep." Sarah walks out into sunlight like somebody put the sky on her side. Eli squeezes her shoulder, gentle, the way you would touch a person who might break into happy tears and not need you to see it. Naomi says, "We're not done," and then she sits in her car and takes off her heels and groans, like she carried a sack of concrete up 3 flights. At home, the cabin looks like it sat up a little taller in the meadow. Sarah puts a blanket on the grass and eats an orange with her hands and feels almost greedy with all the goodness in her mouth. The baby rolls, and the light turns the world the color of peaches. She dreams that night that Eleanor stands at the foot of her bed and says, "The mill, baby girl, the mill," and wakes with her hand pressed to her chest and the taste of creek water in her throat. In the morning, she calls Eli and he says, "I dreamed the same," and she says, "That's ridiculous," and knows from the feeling at the base of her neck that it's not. The old mill is a pile of stone and a memory next to a part of the creek that chews its banks every year like it's angry and sorry both. The wheel is long gone. The spillway holds cold like a bucket. At the foundation on the north side, there is a hole just big enough to shove a hand into and just dark enough to make a person with a baby inside them think about what risks are worth taking. Eli goes down on his stomach while she holds his belt in the back of his shirt, because that's what a person free to move does when their friend is not. His shoulder disappears, then his arm up to the elbow, then his laughter when his fingers curl around a ring, an iron loop pinned into the stone. He grips it, grunts, and a slab of stone gives up a secret with a sound like a tooth sucking free. Under it is a cavity full of dry leaves and 2 tin boxes. The first is letter-sized. The second is small and heavy and has a bank stamp on it. Eli pulls them gently like you would pull a child out of a place they had gotten themselves wedged into. He passes them to Sarah and scrubs dirt out from under his nails with his teeth. "You ever get the feeling you're playing tag with a person who died before you were born?" he says, grinning, and she laughs because that's exactly what this feels like. The letter-sized one is another affidavit, this one handwritten by Silas Caldwell himself and addressed to Judge Pike. It is equal parts confession and self-excusal, the way men who have always gotten credit for their apologies write things. He admits to replacing the original deed. He admits to burning the copy he didn't know was not the original. He admits to paying a man named Briscoe, Sarah remembers the name from the town, $20 to lose the Whitlow file for a month. It is notarized by a name that Naomi will recognize and dated in a shaky hand that looks like a tide. November 2nd, 1932. The small box has the old bank's name on it, embossed. Inside is a ledger page showing an account opened in 1933 with a deposit of $220, enough then to feel like 2 years' worth of groceries, and a note in the margin, for the girl who is growing mine. Interest 3%. Reset every 5 years. It includes the phrase automatic renewal in perpetuity, which makes Sarah laugh out loud because somehow the people who wrote this made magic out of paper and ink. At Blue River Bank, Mr. Collins does not know what to do with the day but enjoys it anyway. He runs the ledger page and the key and the locket through his manager like fibers through a loom, and returns with the solemnness of someone who just saw a kind of miracle. "I can't begin to account for how this was set up," he says, "but the account stands at 86,000 and change. There will be paperwork." There is paperwork. There is also the way a number looks different when it sits on your side of the table and not across from you, like a cat that might scratch if you move too fast. That afternoon, Sarah goes to the doctor because she promised. Dr. Monroe listens to the baby's heartbeat and listens to Sarah's story and says, "Your blood pressure is going to change when you feel like not everything you're doing is for nothing." And Sarah thinks that's the most practical summary of medicine she's heard in her life. The next day, someone breaks into the cabin while she is at the court clerk's office with Eli, pulling deeds and asking for photocopies so fast the machine coughs like it's running a marathon. When they get back, the front door hangs open like a mouth. The box under the floor is thrown across the room. The chimney bricks lie in a pile. The iron cross is out of the ground. She stands for a long time on the porch, gripping the railing until her fingers hurt, and the baby tells her to breathe or he will make her. The only thing missing is one of the letters, the one with the line about the dogwood. She calls Naomi and then the sheriff. The sheriff comes with a hat and a look that says he was born knowing Beau Caldwell's kind. He dusts the broken brick for prints so carefully that Sarah wants to hug him. "We'll talk to Mr. Caldwell," he says, polite. "We'll suggest we have eyes." She spends the night at Hattie's because even brave girls need a friend when the door to their house breaks. Hattie makes soup. Eli stands on the porch with his hands in his pockets and tells her stories about people who made it and people who didn't in a way that doesn't judge either category. He tells her about his sister in Asheville, about the time he fell through ice on a pond when he was a kid and didn't tell his mother because he was afraid she'd make him sit near the stove for the rest of his life. He doesn't mention that his grandfather worked for Caldwell Land and Timber for years. She finds out by accident when she sees a photo on his phone of a man in a mill jacket with his arm around a boy in a letterman's jacket, and the badge on the jacket reads Caldwell in block letters. "You never told me," she says softly. He doesn't pretend not to know what she means. He leans against the porch rail and looks out at the dark like it will give him a word he can use. "I don't believe you inherit your people's sins," he says, "but you inherit their choices like a sore knee, and when the weather turns, you can feel what's coming. When I was 12, I watched a Caldwell throw a beer bottle off a bridge into water, and the light it made was the prettiest thing I'd seen, and I thought, is that who I am? And then my grandmother gave me a book, and I thought, no, this is who I am. I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry." She lets the apology sit for a minute so it can settle into the boards. "Are we on the same side?" she asks. Because all the old pages in the world don't matter if the person standing next to you on the porch is on the other team. He looks at her, and in that look she sees all the ways a man can choose to be something other than where he came from. "Yes," he says simply. "Always." The mountain shifts. She knows you can choose your people. She chooses. Morning brings fog that sits on the field and refuses to move. Sarah makes coffee and tries to shake the feeling that someone is watching the house. Hattie's cat sits in the window and watches the fog like it owes him money. The plan is to go back to the cabin with the sheriff and photograph what changed. Naomi will file a motion to sanction Caldwell for violating the judge's order. Eli will meet them there with a camera and a crowbar for the chimney, because if they break something, they will break it in front of the law. On the drive, Bo calls again. 85, he says, his voice too smooth for a man who is sweating as much as he is. Last offer, before we make this unpleasant. I'm not selling, she says, and his sigh tells her that people do a lot of things when they're under pressure, but they rarely change tone. At the cabin, the grave is deeper, like someone dug and then put everything back like a child closing a storybook too fast. The iron cross lies 2 feet away. Eli kneels and touches the earth. They were looking for more, he says, and the quiet in his voice is worse than yelling. They rebuild the chimney with care while the sheriff asks questions and takes notes. In the chute near the top, Eli finds a tin cylinder, exactly where a poem in Eleanor's notebook promised it would be if a person was patient and counted and did not cut their finger on a brick. Inside is a map like the first, but with lines drawn heavier, and words added in a different hand. Pikes. It shows where a chest lies under a stone marked with a chisel mark only visible if the light hits it at 3 in the afternoon. It also holds a small ring, silver, stamped with an M intertwined with a W, Mary Whitlow, Eleanor's mother. The ring fits on Sarah's smallest finger and warms instantly against her skin. Friday is court again. The room feels different. Word has spread. People you don't know root for you in public, then pretend they didn't in the grocery store. Naomi looks like she slept 4 hours and fought someone in her dreams. Bo looks like he lost something he never thought he would, and isn't sure which expression to put on that won't let you see it. The judge listens to the sheriff say, breaking and entering, and a sanctionable and trespass. He listens to Naomi say, pattern of intimidation and good faith, and we ask for relief. He watches Sarah as if he's seen a lot of women like her, which he has, and wants to know which kind of story hers will be. The DA stands up from the back of the room. Your Honor, may I? She asks. She is new, young, and mean in a way you want a person who might protect you to be. If the court finds this affidavit indeed credible, my office will open an investigation into Caldwell Land and Timbers practices in this county, going back to the date of this affidavit. We have reason to believe, no, Bo's lawyer says, but he might as well have said yes out loud the way everybody sits forward. Bo's face goes white around the mouth. The judge's gavel has barely kissed the desk when Sarah feels a rush of wet and a sudden half-cramp, half-emptiness in her belly. She looks down, her jeans darken. Eli catches her under the elbow automatically, without making it look like she's weak. I think we need to go to the hospital, she says politely to the judge's clerk, because you can take a girl out of the South, but you can't take the South out of a girl when she is about to have a baby near a person in a tie. Good luck, Miss Whitaker, the judge says, upsetting everyone by being kind in a public in a place where people prefer to save it for porches. We'll reconvene on Monday, counselor. Get those maps to the clerk. The hospital smells like old soap and new plastic. Dr. Monroe is there without Sarah having to ask because she has the kind of life where she gives people her days like gifts. The contractions come steady and then cruel. Eli sits in the chair and lets Sarah crush his hand and tells her stories about the time he tipped a canoe over and laughed while he swallowed a gallon of river, and how the person who pulled him out said, "Nice people don't drown, but you aren't always nice, and that's the problem." She laughs, and then hates him for making her laugh, and then loves him for it. Hattie comes with a bag with a blanket in it that her mother made for babies with names she can't remember now, and when Sarah cries to see it, Hattie says, "That's right, that's how we do it." In between the roar of the world narrowing to a belly and a breath, Eleanor is in the room. Not the way dead people are in movies, but the way people you read into your bones are. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't have to. The nurse says, "Push," and she does. And a sound like tearing becomes a sound like singing, and a girl slides into the room like a person who was late to a party she didn't want to miss. They put her on Sarah's chest, and the world pulls in, compresses, clarifies. There is smell and heat and sound, and then the soft little mew that will be the sound to hang everything else on until the world ends again for a different person. Sarah cries without embarrassment, and the baby sneezes and the universe rearranges to accommodate this new person's opinion about air. "What are you going to call her?" Hattie asks, wiping her eyes in a way that says she does not see any room in this conversation for a man's version of it. "Eleanor," Sarah says, "because some debts you pay with a name." "Eleanor Hope Whitaker." "Eleanor Hope," Hattie repeats, tasting the words like a cake that turned out better than the recipe promised. The weekend is long and short. Naomi sends photos of the clerk's office where files that used to be chained loosely to shelves are chained properly and watched while they are read. Eli sleeps in the chair and wakes when the baby makes a sound and doesn't pretend he didn't. Beau's lawyer files yet another motion because the rich are convinced paper can reorder physics. Sarah holds her daughter and breathes like she forgot how and just learned anew. She thinks of the grave and the iron cross and the way the mountain looked when it lifted its fog like a curtain. On Monday, she walks into court with the baby in a sling, Naomi at her side, Eli behind her like a backstop, and Hattie 2 rows back with a thermos of coffee and a prayer she says with her eyes. The judge reads from the affidavit like a person reading something he will not say is scripture, but knows some people in the room will. He speaks about the law with a respect and a familiarity that feels like grace. Quiet title to the parcel known as 235 Old Quarry Road is hereby vested with Miss Sarah Whitaker, heir of Eleanor and June Whitlow. He says plainly, Caldwell Land and Timber is enjoined permanently from encroaching on, purchasing, or otherwise interfering with the property pursuant to the codicil filed with the post office and our clerk. The cemetery boundary will be mapped and fenced at Caldwell's expense. Damages will be addressed in a separate hearing. It's over without trumpets. People clap anyway because they know when a door closes on an old ghost. Beau stands and sits and stands again like he forgot what his body is for. His eyes find Sarah's. There is a flicker there of something she suspects is the first honest one he's had since he learned how to get what he wanted by asking twice. He blinks. He nods, just once, to the baby. Then he leaves, not knowing where to go for the first time in 20 years. Outside, the air is bright and full of nothing dramatic, which is its own drama. The town goes on around them. A dog barks at a squirrel. Somebody drops a box of nails in the hardware store and swears. Hattie says, "Well, there you go," in a way that makes it sound like she expected this all along. They take the baby home. Home is a word that tastes like honey and medicine at once. The cabin's front door has been mended and the lock reinforced. The chimney is new old brick. The grave has a little fence around it that looks like it. Grew there. The iron cross is polished, not shiny, but respectful. And the letters EW have been repainted in black by a man from town who knows how to do that and not ruin the part you can't see by overdoing the part you can. Sarah's cornbread turns out in the pan. It does not stick. The baby sleeps, sleeps again. Eli shows up with a toolbox and a new runner for the old rocking chair, and the way he puts it back together makes Sarah's hands ache with wanting to know how to make anything whole with just wood and patience and time. Hattie hangs curtains that look like somebody paid attention to light and wind when they picked them out. Naomi brings a pie with a note pinned to its foil. "Please don't call me after 9 p.m. unless you're being arrested." They find more. That is how these stories go. even after the court dates are set and won. In the attic, in a box with Christmas lights that don't work, and a wreath that makes your nose itch, there is a ledger with a map of who planted what where in the spring of 1941, and who borrowed whose mule when. There are letters from Judge Pike to someone named Lila that make Hattie sigh and sit on the top step and consider all the ways people chose to love each other when the world wasn't looking. They write names down, they make copies and put them in a folder that says, in case something happens. They keep the locket on a nail by the door because it's easier that way and because it looks right. A week later, there is a community meeting in the church hall with bad coffee and a mic that squeals. The DA stands in front of a map of the county. She says words like indictment and grand jury and pattern. She doesn't look at Bo when she says them because she's not cruel, but when she sits down, a lot of people in the room look lighter in a way that is visible to the naked eye. Sarah stands too, not because she has to, but because people will ask her to anyway. She doesn't say much, she just says, "Thank you," in a way that makes the word sound like a promise. She says, "We'll keep the cemetery tended. If you have names that belong there, tell me, and we'll add them to a stone. The past deserves better than the way men like Mr. Caldwell treated it." On the way home, the baby snuffles and sneezes. The night smells like cold dirt and fried chicken from the gas station. Sarah laughs because she can, because nothing in her chest rattles anymore, because the mountain itself feels like it is breathing in time with her. Eli reaches across the console and squeezes her hand, and she squeezes back, and they don't have to name anything yet to sit in it comfortably. Winter comes. It brings a wind that plays the eaves like an instrument, and a sky that looks like a clean sheet. The cabin is warmer than it has been in years. Baby Eleanor learns to smile like she was born already knowing how. She wakes at 2 in the morning and sometimes at 4, and Sarah rocks her in the rocking chair that Eli mended until the room is soft, and the bellies of both women are warm, and they smell like milk and hope, and the grave out the window looks less like a threat and more like a promise. Sarah opens a little room in the cabin's front where the couch was. She paints the shelves herself while the baby sleeps, and puts books there from the Historical Society, and the library's sale shelf, and gifts left on her stoop by people who want to see if their old love letters look good in sunlight. She calls it Eleanor's porch, even though it's not a porch, because the name feels right. People come on Thursday nights to drink coffee and read old things and talk about new ones. The money isn't what matters. The sound of voices in the room is. One night in January, the creek ices at the edges and the baby gets a fever that rises like a wave. Sarah scoops her up and runs hot water and calls the nurse line and then calls Hattie and Eli both without caring who she called first, because there is no race here. Eli is there in 10 minutes with a thermometer and a face that says he thinks he can bargain with physics. The fever breaks at 3 in the morning and leaves everyone wrung out and new, like a towel on a line that got caught in a rain and then dried in sun. As on the baby's first spring, the dogwoods explode all down the ridge like someone popped popcorn and forgot to worry about the mess. People bring flowers to the little cemetery. Sarah adds names to the stone. Eleanor Whitlow, Mary Whitlow, Judge A, Pike, friend, June, and at the bottom, beloveds unknown. There is a check in the mail from the state some months later. Money owed to the Whitlow family for timber rights that were exercised illegally. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to make repairs and put a little away for a girl who will go to school and come home from it with the smell of pencil shavings in her hair. One afternoon, Bo shows up, hat in hand, in the way of men who try to translate shame into a gesture. He asks if he can walk the boundary. The sheriff let him out on bail that morning, and the DA has him tied up tight enough to make him polite. Sarah says yes, because she says yes to a lot of things now that she used to say no to. He stands at the fence around the graves and takes off his hat and puts it in his hands, the way people were taught to do in Sunday school. He cries quietly, and she doesn't make him say why. "You knew my mother?" she asks. Not because she cares what he says, but because a question helps him set his face back into order. "She knew your Aunt June," he says. "She said she made the best apple cake in the county." "She did," Sarah says, thinking of the smell in the cellar the first day and how even rooms try to hold sweet things. When she looks back, he's gone. She feels sorry for him for 1 second, and then remembers that he would have thrown her out if he could get away with it, and lets him be the kind of man he chose to be. On summer evenings, Eli reads aloud from the notebook, while Sarah sews a button on a baby sweater she bought at the thrift store, with a little duck on it that makes her laugh. He reads, "Hope can be found in the forgotten places," and looks up at her because the book says what he has been trying not to say out loud. She looks back and lets the look do the work for them both. When he leans forward and kisses her, it is soft and careful, and then something else, and the baby in the cradle snuffles and sighs like she knows all the things you can learn late and still teach early. As summer drifts into fall, people talk about how the Caldwell money built the library and the park, but they also talk about what the money stole. Sarah sits on her porch and listens to both. She rocks the baby and runs her thumb along the locket chain and watches as the wind lifts the dogwood leaves and makes the light dance. She says a small prayer not to any one person or God, but to the idea that the mountains keep secrets until the right person asks for them. The last pages of the notebook are blank. She thinks about writing there, and then decides not to. Instead, she starts a new one. On the first page, she writes in her uneven hand that has gotten steadier with love. "My name is Sarah Whitaker, and I found you, Eleanor. I found what you left, and I'll leave something for the one who comes after me." Then she writes, "All of this is ours, and none of it is owed." One crisp night in October, a storm rolls in, all bark and no bite. Sarah pulls the rocking chair close to the window so she can see the grave and the trees, and the place where the light from the kitchen falls onto the grass in a square. Baby Eleanor sleeps heavy in her arms. Eli snores softly on the couch, his feet hanging off the end because he refuses to admit the couch is too short for him. The stove tick-ticks. The house breathes. She thinks of the day she pulled into the clearing and saw the iron cross and thought her life was over before it started. She smiles at the asinine thought and then forgives herself for having it. She looks down at the small person who ruined her life enough to build her a better one, and she says, in a voice that can only live in a house that belongs to a woman who walks out in front of what is coming and says, "Me first? Here we are. We're okay. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with us on this ride. If this story kept you here a while, do me a kindness. Tap like, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. It helps this little corner grow, and I promise you there's a new story waiting for you tomorrow. Good night from the mountains.